Hello and welcome to the Runna Podcast. Today we chatted to Chrissie Wellington OBE and three-time Ironman World Champion.
She had a very unusual journey into becoming a professional triathlete at the age of 30. But what was different to almost anyone else we've spoken to was her immense joy, passion, and gratitude to being able to perform at the level that she was. And in that time as a professional athlete, she went on to win 13 Ironman races in a row, undefeated, before retiring just 5 years later. We chat through what it took to be that great, the journey at the top, and then reflecting back on her time at the top. You are going to love listening to today's episode. Let's get into it. Hey, Chrissie, how are you?
Good, thank you.
Well, we love to start all of our episodes kind of asking what got you into moving your body all the way back at day one.
I was always an active child, but I prioritised academia over sport, over structured sport, or I should say over pursuing my potential in sport. So for me, sport was always really social and really fun. And I think all of the kind of motivation or the drive or the determination I channeled into academia. So I was active and I tried lots of different activities. My parents were so encouraging in that way. But when I went to university, I did a little bit of swimming, but really fell off the kind of sporting bandwagon, as so many young women especially do, age kind of 16 or 17. And I went travelling after university, and it was when I was doing my master's in Manchester that I started running. I was incredibly inspired by my friend. My friend had grown up with a heart defect and the year before had run the London Marathon. And I'm sure many of us have done this. I looked at her and me with my fully functional heart and thought, what's stopping me? So I started walking more and then that progressed to running. And I found that it had, you know, a range of incredible benefits, as we know, but especially the mental health benefits. Not that we spoke a lot about mental health, you know, in the early 2000s, but reflecting back, I now can see that it provided me with this amazing release from the pressures of academia. So that was really how I segued into running specifically. And again, inspired by my friend, got a charity place for the London Marathon in 2002. And that's where I first cut my teeth in endurance sports.
I guess it's so interesting to hear the way you described even that first experience with leisure sport or play or whatever it was growing up, because there must be something about you and your mindset that when you couple that with discovering running and triathlon later on, that leads to a world champion. What do you think it is about? Like, what did you enjoy most around all of that play? Was it the social aspect? Was it the competition of playing, doing team sports, or that led to that enjoyment?
For me, one of the most important things about physical activity is social connection. We all know the physical and psychological health benefits, but those are so deeply interwoven with social connection. And at school, for periods of kind of my teenage years, I was bullied at school, and so I felt excluded, and I didn't really feel like I belonged. And it was at the swimming club that I felt that I'd found my tribe. I felt valued. I felt like I belonged. I felt connected and respected. And I think through sport, I felt that I could be authentically me. So for me, that was the hook. That, you know, I guess gave me that love for physical activity. Was that it was that social connection, and that's continued to this day, and I still see it as being an incredibly important part of being active.
And so as you're, I guess, finding your running back in Manchester, were you able to do it in a sociable way, or was it more of a solo thing and finding those kind of mental health benefits at the same time?
Initially a solo activity, and a emotional and mental release from the pressures that I was placing on myself academically. So there was value in that solo pursuit, but very quickly it became much more social, much more interactive as I became more deeply immersed in the world of running and moving down to London. I was working for the government at that point, joined a running club, and that interaction and that shared endeavour and that element of competition was really, really important, I think, as my journey went on.
And that you describe the level of pressure you put on yourself with your academics. I find that really interesting because I imagine that presumably that then moves onto the pressure you put on yourself with your physical performances, which might be why you go on to do such incredible things. Do you think there's something deep rooted in your core that pushes you just to do what you're doing, whatever that may be, to the very best degree?
I think I'm able to channel that drive, that determination, that resilience into certain pursuits, but I can't channel it into every pursuit simultaneously. So I think for me, growing up, I invested all my energy in academic excellence. And so to do the same in parallel with sport, I think would not have been sustainable. So I think sport provided me with that something else. And subsequent to academia, I then could channel it into kind of sporting endeavours as it became apparent that was a path that I was going to go down. So I wouldn't say there's an on-off switch, but definitely I channel that into certain pursuits, but don't channel it into every pursuit I do at any one time.
The way you approached like your pursuit of sport. So I'm thinking of my brother who's a doctor, and the way he's always prioritized his academia, it's so like scientific, it's so informed, it's so structured, so that when he goes and does sport, it's like the opposite, and he loves that freedom, and he doesn't like it to be like really focused, really technical. Did you find that, or was it kind of the opposite, kind of as Ben was saying, and it was the same approach to both?
Yeah, what a phenomenal question. I enjoyed doing sport recreationally and as a professional because of that raw and deep love that your brother has articulated. For me, it was about curiosity and exploration of physical and psychological potential. I found that once I layered on the science and the metrics and the data, it almost corrupted the humanity of the activity. So I used data science sparingly and strategically, because I never wanted to lose that raw love, that intuition, that perception, and that the simple joy of moving for moving's sake.
As in, you felt that when you stopped listening to your body as much and more centered around like looking at your mileage, looking at what you should be doing, looking at your splits, trying to hit times, it took the joy out of the training, which is the thing that you needed.
Yes. Yeah.
And it didn't inhibit your performance by doing that.
No, that's not to say that data isn't important. Metrics, data, tools, tickers, counters, they're important. I never wanted, like I said, that to kind of override my intuitive sense of self and the deep love that I had for movement. And I think for me, once you start layering on data and metrics, there's that comparative element which people, not everyone, but someone like me can find challenging. For me, it was just about using tools and metrics strategically, but not letting them dictate everything that I did. So, for example, well, when I first got into running, I just had a very old watch, and I had a little wheel that my grandfather gave me. And if you've got the time on your watch, obviously, and then you roll this little wheel along a OS map, and then you get the distance. So that was my kind of first GPS watch, so I can measure time and distance. So I wasn't really an early adopter of technology. And even as a professional athlete, I had a GPS watch, but I'd cover it up. And so I'd try and kind of predict the pace that I was doing, and then afterwards uncover it and see how close my perception was to reality. Because I think it's really important that you don't rely on a gadget to be able to tell you if you're running at a certain pace. Like, I intuitively could sense that, could feel that, but that was then validated or verified through the technology. So I could use both.
I think that's fascinating, because it's also such a different way of thinking that so many people will center their training today. And I think we all have different psyches. And I think it's clearly a case of like you recognizing the way that made it most enjoyable for you, because I think it's that enjoyment which is what leads to that sustained long-term progress, right? Yes,
it is. But it's also thinking about why we do what we do. What is it about the activity that gives us the most enjoyment? And for some that are deeply analytical, love the numbers, for them that's what it's all, that's as much as of what it's all about as the actual activity itself. Whereas for me it was entirely different. But I was so fortunate to have a team around me when I was a professional athlete that I could almost outsource that analysis to someone else, which was also valuable. So I could have my watch, I could have my data, and I could say, here, coach, here's the numbers. So there's also that element of outsourcing that analysis or interpretation of that data to someone else with more expertise than me.
So your why that you just mentioned, how did that London Marathon go, and why did you launch yourself in the world of triathlon?
Through the London Marathon, I unearthed a talent that I had never known existed. So it gave me that opportunity to explore myself. And for me personally, that's what life is about. It's about curiosity and exploration, about one's physical, psychological potential. So for me, it was just this incredible revelation that I'd found something that I enjoyed, and I'd found something that I had a talent for. I knew that it would never take me to the top of the world in terms of running, and I didn't have those aspirations, but I knew that it was something that I wanted to invest more energy in. So I joined a club, like I said, in London, and started training a lot more seriously. I wanted to run a sub 3-hour marathon, and I combined running with some cross training, so started swimming again, and that brought me into contact with someone else that would, in retrospect, change the direction of my life. And he said, Chrissie, you should do a triathlon. I've never really ridden a bike, let alone a road bike. And we we got hold of a secondhand bike, and I started training in a very kind of unknowledgeable, unstructured fashion, but supported by a bunch of triathletes that were also runners, and did my first triathlon, a super sprint triathlon, just outside London in Eton. And I was bitten by the bug. I absolutely loved it. I loved the challenge. I loved the camaraderie. I loved the opportunity to test myself across 3 disciplines. I just felt so invested in this sport almost from the outset. But that year, I was working as a policy advisor to the government on international development policy, which is my life passion. And I took a sabbatical and went to live and work in Nepal. So that kind of put a stop to triathlon. But whilst in Nepal, we cycled. Some friends I'd made and the Nepali Sherpas cycled every morning, and then on weekends we'd take the bikes. We cycled over the Himalayas, 1,400 kilometers from the capital of Tibet back to Kathmandu, from Lhasa to Kathmandu via Everest Base Camp. And again, I mean, Steve Jobs talks about being able to join the dots when you look in the rearview mirror. And my time in Nepal, reflecting back, was such a significant dot in my life. Not that I realized it then, because going back to what I said about sport in its rawest sense, that epitomized that approach to movement and activity. And we were just cycling. We weren't training. We were just working hard, enjoying being together, testing ourselves and being immersed in the landscape. And it was phenomenal. And I came back to the UK. I went cycle touring after the time in Nepal, came back to the UK, and I guess I didn't appreciate the strength I'd gained, not just the physical strength, and layered on top of that the benefits of being at altitude, but also the psychological strength I think that I developed from being active in those really testing environments. So I came back to the UK and thought to myself, well, I'll immerse myself back in the world of triathlon, and who knows where it will go, but never with any expectation that I would be fortunate enough to make it my career.
So you come back from this maybe accidental, phenomenal cycling altitude training camp, immerse yourself back into the triathlon scene. How does it go?
Terribly. I didn't have any money. And so whilst I wanted to do triathlon, you need, some basic kit. So I didn't even have a wetsuit at that point. So I borrowed a wetsuit from my friend, a male friend, and entered the Redditch Super Sprint Triathlon, and got in the water with what I realised very quickly was an oversized wetsuit. So the gun went off and the wetsuit just flooded with water, and I couldn't swim, and I had to be rescued by a kayaker and pulled to the side. So it wasn't really auspicious beginnings. But that year I joined a club, which was really, really important. Joined a club and got a coach. And both of those, I think I had that cocoon of support. And I also had that personalized mentoring that I needed. And so I did a number of other races. The majority of them went very well. And in one, I qualified for the World Age Group Championships. So in the sport of triathlon, many of your listeners will know it's divided into the elite professional level and the amateur level, or the age group level. And so I qualified as an amateur for the World Age Group championships, which were held in Lausanne in Switzerland. And I was just so thrilled and proud and honoured to be wearing the Great Britain kit. And never in my wildest dreams did I imagine winning my age group, let alone winning the female race overall. And that's what happened. And that moment changed my life forever, because I had this decision to make about whether or not to become a professional athlete, and I was aged 29. Not an easy decision.
No, it's amazing. No, but did your training change when you got that age group, like qualification to race?
It's always primarily for joy. And I found that I race best when I'm liberated from expectation. So I think that that runs counter often to the narrative around you need this clear and ambitious goal in order to be able to achieve it, number one, and you need that self-belief. I didn't have either. But what I did have was this curiosity, this drive, this determination just to give everything I had. And coupled with that, I had a coach that could see something in me that I didn't know I had. So my coach, I guess, without me knowing, was designing a program to take me to the top of the world at the amateur level. All I had to do was execute. So I liberated myself, and he liberated me from the pressure of expectation. And all I needed to do was to execute the training and the race. And so thinking back to the minutiae of my training, I'm sure it did change. I'm sure subtly he wove progression into that, and without that I couldn't have seen the improvement that I did. But that's, I think for me, it's so important that performative element is coupled with that joy and the liberation from pressure and expectation.
And so following this win, you make a decision, and how does your life change?
The decision was really difficult to make. With every decision in life, you have forks in the road. We're always encountering them, but it requires choice and compromise. And I wasn't sure whether I wanted to make the choice to give up my career, a career that I loved. I wasn't sure that I wanted to go and live overseas. I wasn't sure that that I wanted to have the financial instability that came with being a professional athlete. I was uncertain and I was scared. But I never want to look back and think, what if? I never want to be left wondering. So the biggest fear I have is not knowing, is not having been brave enough to find the answer, even if the answer is you're not good enough. So I, with the support of my family and my friends, my coach, gave up my job and became a professional athlete aged 30. And although physically, of course, training as a professional sports person, as a 24/7 occupation, is incredibly demanding and difficult. I think the biggest challenge was psychological, intellectual, because I found sport to be an incredibly selfish, self-indulgent pursuit. It's all about you, and it's all about you attaining your dreams or fulfilling your potential. And I'm not positioning myself as a martyr, but I was struggling to reconcile that with my deeper passion to serve the world, to have a positive impact on other people. And I guess that selfish pursuit was juxtaposed against all the things that I'd experienced working in international development, and it was jarring with me. And that's what I found really difficult. And it was only when I spoke about my concerns to my first coach, and his response, I'll always remember it. He said, "Chrissie, through your achievements in the sport, you'll be able to achieve more than you could ever imagined out of it." So again, he could see something in me that I hadn't seen, but he could also see that I had the opportunity to create a platform for myself, to make sport, rather than an end in itself, a means to another end. And that, you spoke about the why, Anya, that became my why. And I think it's so important that every athlete has that big macro why. And then underlying that, yes, you can have your goals. I want to win this race. I want to do a certain time. I want to break this record. But having something that goes beyond that is so important. So that became my why.
Were there also like societal pressures with being a 30-year-old woman? And I guess people around you might be having kids and devoting their whole life to like their family and things. And then you could really struggle with, as you say, like it's quite a selfish sport, and you then focusing really intrinsically on yourself. Did that ever play a thought in your head?
I don't think it was gendered, and I don't think it was necessarily because I'm a female athlete. At the time I was single, so I wasn't imagining a situation in the near future where I was going to settle down and have a family. So it wasn't that I thought that sport might compromise that. It was the fact that my life has always been shaped by purpose, and I was struggling to see how this endeavor was contributing to that. And now again, the rearview mirror, I can see how it has and how it does. But initially as an athlete, I failed because I wanted to be an Olympian. And people forget that sometimes about my story. You know, I think a sporting journey is riddled with highs and lows and ups and downs and success and failure. And for me, the failure came very early in the form of not qualifying for the Great Britain team for the Beijing Olympics. That was why I became a professional athlete. That's what I envisaged. Because Ironman was for stupid, crazy people and didn't appeal to me whatsoever. But again, it was my coach that made me realize that although I'd failed, I wasn't a failure. And that, again, I had strengths that I hadn't known existed. And those strengths lay much more in the Ironman distance than they did in the Olympic distance. So with his encouragement, I pivoted from focusing on Olympic distance to Ironman.
And have you made peace with that? Like, would you have wanted to rewind time, and you go on in your story to very much more than succeed in Ironman? But is there a world in which, if you could rewind time and change the dice, one in the Olympics and not one in the Ironman?
We make the best decision that we can at these forks in the road. And so I can see a whole range of different lives that I could have led. I don't live with regret. There is the question about, had you got into triathlon earlier, had you invested earlier, would you then have had the time to focus on Olympic distance? Perhaps, but
also
I'm blessed with the opportunity that I had, and had I focused on that in my 20s, I never would have had the exposure to, international development. I never would have lived in Nepal and had that incredible immersion in a new culture and in a new environment. So I'm a really positive person, and I see the value in all of the stages that I've
and also
taken.
I think the key is that you found triathlon understanding your purpose, which is what led you to such success. And imagine you had done a world of prioritizing your training at a much younger age and pursuing doing Olympic distance, you may well have burnt out and not loved it in the way that you did, or not had that bigger purpose, which is what you needed to become the greatest in the world.
Because sport is a finite occupation. There's not many careers that you go into knowing that career has a shelf life. And so life has to be about something more. You have to know who you are and what you care about and what your life purpose is beyond sport. That's not to say it's not important. It really is. It was the anchor for my life for a while. But you need to know who you are beyond that, where your strengths are, your skills are, what your interests are. Because it will come to an end and there has to be something more. And so had I got into the sport earlier, maybe I wouldn't have had that perspective. Maybe it would have been my everything. But at some point, you're forced at that fork to make a decision about what's next. And I think I'm so fortunate that I can then fall back on all those life experiences. And it enabled me to race with a perspective that maybe some other athletes that have been immersed in a sport their whole life don't have.
So you won the Ironman World Championships on your debut year. That is like an overnight success story. And I'm sure there's a lot more hard work than just that. But do you think you saying like you were very aware there was like a shelf life on the sport? Do you think your approach to that was like, okay, I've got to be really intentional here. I'm going to win the Ironman World Championships rather than I've got years and years and years in the sport. Like, was your approach different knowing that?
It sounds like a meteoric progression, and in some ways it was. But like you said, that's as much for brevity. We don't have the time to kind of dive deeply into the process necessarily. I was impatient. I knew that I didn't have long, both physically, but also financially. I needed to make a living. I need to make a living quite quickly in order to be able to sustain myself in the sport. But I didn't go into the World Championships with the expectation or the goal of winning it. I went into the World Championships conceiving of it as just another race, having respect for the race, but not deference to the history of the race that said that it couldn't be won by a first timer, and respect but not deference to all of my much more experienced competitors. But just going back to what we talked about earlier, I was liberated from expectation, which enabled me to elevate my performance to the point where I could achieve success. Now in the years subsequent to that, it changed, because obviously you're racing with internal and external expectation. But in the first year, I found that naivety was my kryptonite, because I wasn't weighed down by expectation or deference. So it's really interesting to think back to that race and how naive I was, but how elevating that approach can be to performance.
And I guess that naivety was amplified by not obsessing over the minutiae in the data. Because maybe, is there a case where you didn't really know how good you were because you weren't obsessing on the data and you weren't obsessing on everyone else to know how you stack up?
Yeah, you've hit the nail on the head. I had the opportunity to measure myself against my teammates. So I was training as part of a team, and many of those male and female athletes had competed at the World Championships in Hawaii, in a town called Kona. So I was able to see, how I stacked up against, relative to them. But I think my coach consciously didn't burden me with the ambition that he had for me. So again, similar to when I raced as an amateur and I was coached, without necessarily being aware of what the intended outcome was. Again, I think my coach had designed a program with the goal of enabling me to become world champion without me ever realizing that. And it was just so surreal to win the world championships, and to have achieved something that I never would have imagined, I never would have envisaged. But I knew immediately when I crossed the finish line what an incredible opportunity it is, what a privilege it is, to have been able to race on the world stage, be able to explore your potential, and then be able to represent your sport, be able to advocate for causes that you care about. It wasn't lost on me, and it still isn't.
Does that come with pressure? Your biggest superpower to this point is, maybe as you describe your naivety, that the year that follows, is there now pressure and a lack of naivety?
With success, inevitably comes pressure, and it's your responsibility as a professional athlete to have strategies to be able to deal with that. So for me, having incredible people in my corner was paramount, because they could enable me to keep perspective, but also act as a buffer to some of the pressure, whether that's media commitments or sponsor obligations or whatever that might be. So having incredible people around me, retaining perspective is so important. I think, yes, whilst it's a manifestation of all your hard work if you can achieve success, ultimately a win should never ever define you and who you are. And I think that comes back to what we were saying earlier about having a life beyond sport. So I think the people, I think the perspective is really important. And these are all P's, aren't they? People, perspective, and privilege. Like seeing pressure as a privilege. Like I'm constantly reframing. So, for example, when I'm racing and you experience discomfort, you can reframe that. And I think that process of reframing and reframing pressure into a privilege is really, for me, really important. So of course it increases as you achieve more success, but it's incumbent upon you as an athlete to have those strategies. And I think those three are really, really, really important.
Did you know you were working on those mental strategies? You could have easily like won the Ironman World Champs and been like, I achieved, the ultimate success. What meant that you carried on? Because you were undefeated for 13 Ironman distance races.
So I guess two parts
Yeah.
to that question, like the psychological strategies, and then, why did I continue as a professional athlete, and then probably why did I hang up my lycra. Training your body, as I said, is a 24-hour a day, 7 days a week occupation. I'm training my body and my mind to be the best it can be. So yes, I'm swim, bike and running, but it also incorporates rest and recovery and sleep and nutrition and hydration and strength and conditioning and all the other pillars. The psychological training is so important, and it must be woven into that process of training one's body and mind, and must be done, whilst you're training, rather than you expecting it to kind of miraculously materialize it in a race. So for me, training was about developing those psychological tools that I could use, not only when the going gets bad, but when it's good as well, because you have to have strategies to enable to remain calm, to not get carried away with yourself, not be too euphoric. But so I think there's that modulation, that emotional modulation that is really necessary. So, I mean, we can talk through some of those strategies if there's time. But for me, the act of training was as much about developing that psychological strength that I needed in a race, as it was the physical strength. Why did I continue? I continued because I wanted to explore my potential. I wanted to know how good I could be. But what I realized was that isn't necessarily measured by times or numbers of victories or world championship wins. It was an intuition, like a feeling inside when I'd raced what was my final race, that race had been everything that I'd wanted, and it had answered every question I'd ever asked of myself. And I knew then that I was worthy of being called a champion and that I could retire. So the journey that I went on was that journey of curiosity and exploration. But of course, all of the other motivational factors, the camaraderie, the competition, all of those things, they're all woven into that, compulsion to keep racing. But for me, it was very much about fulfillment of potential, and then that purpose of utilizing that platform.
And if it wasn't time, what was the feeling that you felt at the end of your final race? Was it that you did the best swim you could have asked for, and you were confident that your your stroke was great, and then your ride, you had a really nice position. Like, what was it that you were measuring, if it wasn't a time, that allowed you to have such fulfillment at the finish?
It was that I felt I'd overcome imperfections perfectly.
And so there was nothing left that you could shave because it was a perfect race.
But not because everything went perfectly, but because it didn't.
Tell me more about that. What do you mean by that?
I question whether in a race like an Ironman, which can be at its fastest, 8 hours, you can never have everything can ever go perfectly. It can't, and nor should it.
But it went as perfect as you could ask it to.
When things went wrong, before and during, I dealt with them as perfectly as I possibly could. So again, thinking about the reframing topic, I never go into a race thinking I want it to go like this, 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 and this. It all needs to go like this for things to go perfectly. It sounds not defeatist, but pessimistic, but to think like this could go wrong, this could go wrong. And I go into it not just expecting that, but almost wanting that, because that element of drama and jeopardy is what makes sport so beautiful. And it just goes back to the metrics. If everything is so predictable and
boring,
boxed by data or gadgets, you lose that element of drama. You lose that humanity. You lose that element of jeopardy that's so exciting about sport. So I don't ever go into a race thinking it's going to go perfectly. But what I want is when things go wrong to be able to deal with it as well as I possibly can. And I think so much went wrong in the lead up and during that race that it makes me incredibly proud to have had the race I had. And so I think it was that experience that completed me. And I realized that no matter how many more races I may have run and won, I didn't think anything would come close to that feeling.
And how was it then walking away from professional sport? And how does sport carry on within your life thereafter?
It's incredibly difficult for many reasons: psychological, financial, practical. In leaving the sport, albeit on my own terms, you lose your structure, your social safety net. You lose your source of income, suddenly for some, gradually for others. Your goal. I think most importantly, it calls into question your sense of self, so your identity. So who am I, especially as a public figure, if not Chrissie Wellington World Champion? Because that's how the public knows you, and that's your value. And there's a real challenge in conceiving of yourself beyond that. And so I found it incredibly difficult. And the compulsion to keep racing to retain that structure and that goal and that sense of validation and that self-worth and the adulation, all of that, the temptation to keep that is so high. But I knew that I had to do the hard thing, because the easy thing is to remain a professional athlete. Physically hard, but it's your comfort zone. The hardest thing is to step away, especially if you're doing it on your own terms. But I knew that's why I needed to do it. And so it was incredibly difficult. I had to be content in the void, to grieve almost what I'd given up, and to then look forward and carve out a new life where sport is a pillar, a part, but not the entirety.
I think it's so amazing, and you've had, you've left like there's an amazing legacy there with so many things that you've said. One, like enjoying the sport. Two, approaching when things go wrong, so the non-perfect things perfectly, and also not choosing the easy way out. Like the hard way out is what's going to really challenge you. So yeah, thank you so much. And on that note, we're going to segue over to Coach Steph's coaching tip of the week.
Cold weather can make warming up harder, so add a few minutes of dynamic drills before you start. Think bodyweight squats, lunges, high knees. Layer up, but avoid overdressing. You should feel slightly cold at the start. Once you're moving, your body will warm up quickly.
Hey guys, this episode is brought to you by the Runna app, the #1 rated running coaching service worldwide. If you want to try the app today, use code podcast25 for 2 weeks totally for free. And please do remember to rate, follow and subscribe to us on your listening platform to help us climb the rankings and so that we can keep bringing you the most interesting and amazing guests.
Thanks for that, Steph. I'm going to bring us back with some sillier this or that. So, Chrissie, would you rather race Kona all over again at the end of this month, or a marathon tomorrow?
A marathon tomorrow. Yeah, I might need to be rescued in the swim like I was all those years ago. Yeah. I still love to run. I still love to get on my bike. I do enjoy swimming, but it's just not something that is part of my life in the way that it was. So I think that the swim would be a challenge. If I could get onto the bike, maybe I'd be confident that I could finish, but I'm much more confident that I could complete a marathon.
What about you, Ben? Fresh off a half Ironman with a marathon in less than 2 weeks.
Well, I feel like I end up doing both quite a lot of the time. I'm doing New York Marathon in, 11 days, did a half Ironman on Saturday. But I think if I could only do one, so I could either do a marathon tomorrow or an Ironman at the end of the month, I think I'd take the Ironman. But
would you?
But that's because I enjoy cycling a lot. So I would, and I also think I enjoy the challenge of a marathon more, knowing that you are doing it at this enormous deficit, which is you're now exhausted. Whereas it seems almost too easy to get to do a marathon where you're like slept and fueled.
Depends where it is though. Like you've got to be acclimatized. So if you're going to do your Ironman in Hawaii,
you see,
different.
But I almost enjoy that more, partly because like everyone is in the same boat. Like I actually don't really care. About like the time I get so much, and more about like how I do relative to everyone else. And like if it's harder for me, it's harder for everyone. So then like even if I'm suffering on the run, knowing that like I am slowing down, it's hot. I know that hopefully everyone else is slowing down by more, and then it's like a question of who's like braver. And also for me personally, I lived in Greece for 2 years and ran the fitness department at a 5-star hotel where it was very hot. So I think I would like.
You could draw on that.
I would differentially.
Historic.
Yeah, there's probably
acclimatization.
Yeah, 5 years ago I went out in the sun once, and now I'm like really good. But no, I think more that like I think I would thrive better than those around me, and then that would fuel me on.
That's an interesting psychological tactic, though, just to remember that whilst you're hurting, most other people are too, maybe at different
Yeah.
points in time. But, you know, some people, like when I raced, I loved to race with a smile, and people would say, oh, you made it look so easy. But that's almost my game face, you know, and inside I'm hurting and struggling.
But it's the whole way through sport. Like, you've been massively involved with parkrun, and take parkrun, for example. Like, for me, going to a parkrun, most of the time I'll run it socially with my friends, but sometimes I want to run as fast as I can and see the time I can do. But the time I do is completely driven by how hilly the course is, and whether it was icy and running through puddles, or whether it was like a perfect condition, dry, grippy tarmac.
Yeah.
So therefore, like, if it's freezing cold, raining, and I've got to run through a waterlogged Richmond Park, I will run slower, but so does the person next to me, and therefore it's completely, now how do I fare at running through puddles and knowing that my feet are blistering more than someone else? And again, it's almost then what makes it fun again.
Yeah.
And probably actually similar to what you spoke about, which is it's kind of like throwing all the data away and we roll the dice, see how we feel right now, and then all you can do is embrace the conditions and do your best.
And it's all about your personal effort, and that might be comparative.
Yeah.
But the beauty of parkrun is you can consume it in so many different ways. It can be a competition, but it can also very much be participatory and very much about you. But
I think that through line can be from parkrun, which might be at the more accessible end of sport, through to an Ironman, which is you can view an Ironman solely around the time you get. And I often do attach a lot of pressure and care about my time, but like you also can view it as a completion, as a relativity to everyone else, as a personal challenge. And I think like that's what can make the journey from going from a parkrun to a 10K to a half marathon to a marathon to an ultra marathon or to an Ironman this like fantastic spectrum where there's no right place you can be in. The same level of joy that some people find focusing on the track or on parkrun or 5K can be felt at the complete other extreme, but it is exactly the same medicine or the same kind of craziness that is in all of us.
Yeah, but I guess what you're speaking about also is that social connection piece that we spoke about earlier. It's not just about you and your performance, but it's also about doing that in the company of
and
others.
I think that's also the motivation, is that even if I did a parkrun today, I might do 18 minutes, but someone else might go and do 36 minutes, and that takes them twice as long. But if they tried just as hard, I think they're twice as impressive as I am, because they've endured running at 100% effort, but for twice as long.
Oh, the most phenomenal experience is going back to the finish line of an Ironman event, which has a 17-hour cutoff.
The hero's hour.
And it's just phenomenal, because you think about the context of their life and what their juggling may have been dealing with, what they've been through before the race, during the race. And for me, that encapsulates and epitomizes all that is amazing, not just about Ironman or triathlon, but about sport and human endeavor. And I, I challenge anyone not to go to the finish and not be moved by.
It's so
that.
humbling, and it almost makes it funny that we want to talk to the fastest person, not the slowest person, because some people will be out there for nearly twice as long as you are.
Yeah.
And I was in Portugal. I did a half Ironman on Saturday. One of my best friends came second in the women's race.
Yeah.
When she finished, there are still triathletes doing the cycle with a marathon to come.
Yeah.
She can go eat her dinner, have a shower, enjoy some celebrations, get ready for bed, and there's probably still 3 hours to go. And like, what they've done is incredible.
Yeah.
Yet there are people out there having to go through the entire thing for twice as long.
And that's why, as a professional athlete, sometimes I felt very uncomfortable being put on this pedestal and just thinking about the achievements. Like my achievement, having invested everything in that, was no better or worse than the person that's doing 15 hours or 17 hours. Their achievement is, as significant as mine.
I think it's the centre of why like running and triathlon is so fantastic. And you could joke as to, I don't know whether I see it as like a kind of common theme, as a kind of a social media joke, whatever it is. For anyone who looks in on the running world, who doesn't run, and they hear about their friend who's running a marathon, and they're like, oh, how did you get on? Did you win? You know, like they say that to the average person. They're like, no, I did a 5-hour marathon. I'm delighted. And they're like, oh, so where'd you come? 30,000 out of 50,000. Why'd you get a medal? You didn't come in the top 3. But what they did is just as impressive at the top end, at the middle, and at the back.
Yeah.
But until you've kind of like really understood that we've all battled in the same way and we all deserve the same celebration, it's quite hard to see that from the outside, where normally you only celebrate the winners.
That's just a childlike comment, isn't it? That's what I love about, our daughter. She, she doesn't necessarily see it through the lens that we, maybe more experienced athletes see it. So yeah, she's very much, about that achievement, and you've crossed that finish line, and that's absolutely fantastic. It doesn't matter if you've come first or if you've come 100th, and I think that just makes you appreciate that achievement comes in all shapes, all sizes, all times, and all distances, doesn't it?
If she went and did a run a cross country run at school or a sports day or something, would your first question to her be, did you enjoy it or did you win? Or
did you enjoy it? Yeah. That's paramount for us, that she enjoys moving her body and testing herself, and enjoys losing as much as she enjoys winning. That's really important.
And that's so full circle to where we started the conversation. So our closing question is to design your dream race. So what is the event? Where is it? What food and drink is at the finish line? And who would present you with your award?
So this is a hypothetical.
Yes.
Your dream race. It could be a run, it could be a triathlon, it could be 3 different sports you club together.
It's got to be a triathlon, because I love the opportunity to weave together 3 sports into one. And I often think it's interesting that people compartmentalize triathlon into 3 disciplines, like I've just done, because it's really one sport, and the talent is being able to combine 3 disciplines into one sport. If that subtlety makes sense. So a triathlon, it would be in Hawaii because it's a place that means so much to me and my family. But with the atmosphere of an event in Germany called Challenge Roth. So Challenge Roth is an Ironman distance race in a very small town, just, kind of near Munich and Nuremberg in Germany. But it comes alive. It's got this deep, deep history, and 250, 300,000 people come out to watch. And I love the performative element of sport. I love being part of an occasion. That's why I think the London Marathon is so phenomenal. You just feel like you're part of something super, super special, and the crowds, play into that. So I think it would be in Hawaii, but with the crowds that are at Challenge Roth, and that deep kind of history and culture and appreciation for endurance sports. Food at the finish line.
Yeah,
that's
food and
very
drink.
important. That's probably the most important thing, isn't it? When I finish a race, I crave salty, fatty foods. So for me, kind of chips, pizza, burger. But it needs to be available maybe like 2 hours afterwards, because as soon as you cross the finish line, you've sometimes got race belly, and you're not that interested. You're definitely not interested in consuming any kind of sugary snacks, but you're not really interested in eating. So I think maybe 2 hours after, then I go to this buffet of salty, fatty goodness that's never ending.
And who would present you with your award?
My daughter. She's my greatest achievement. And I've learned so much from parenting her. Sport provided me with so many learning opportunities. But that pales into insignificance when it comes to parenting. And so I'd like to be able to pay it, for her to be able to, give me my trophy, but almost like complete that circle.
Wow, that is amazing. Well, thank you for joining us, sharing your incredible story and inspiring most certainly Anya and I, but I'm sure all of our listeners as well. So thank you for joining.
Thank you. Thanks so much for the opportunity. It's been incredible.